Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Today, we are stripping away the pitchforks and pop culture myths to uncover the historical evolution of God's ultimate adversary. We'll trace how a simple prosecutor in an ancient divine court transformed through centuries of empires, cultural collisions, and theological shifts into the cosmic force of evil we recognize today. It's a journey that challenges how we view the nature of God, the origins of evil, and how religious concepts are historically constructed.
Yeah, it really is a phenomenal journey. And, whether you approach this deep dive from a framework of devout religious belief, a purely atheistic perspective, or, well, just a genuine fascination with human history, our goal today is to put on our historian hats.
Right, because we aren't here to validate or debunk personal theologies, are we?
Exactly. We are here to look objectively at the primary texts. We want to trace the mechanics of how these monumental ideas actually moved and mutated across thousands of years.
Which is just wild to think about. We are getting into the grit of the history, the geopolitical context, and just the incredibly human story behind these ancient texts. But before we dive into the ancient world, if you like my channel, please subscribe and hit the like button. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
When I say the word Satan, you probably have a highly specific image locked in your mind, right? Like, I immediately think of the pop culture caricature.
Oh, sure.
Like the red, scaly skin, a bifurcated tail, horns, maybe standing in a lake of fire with a pitchfork, sort of like the devil in that movie, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Right, which is fascinating because that specific visual, the horns, the red skin, the pitchfork, has absolutely no basis in the text of the early Bible.
Wait, really? Not at all?
None. When you trace the iconography, that image is a chaotic blend of artistic traditions that emerged much, much later. We are talking medieval and Renaissance period.
Oh.
Yeah, that's where artists started blending concepts of the Greek god Pan, with his goat legs and various European pagan deities, just to create a recognizable visual shorthand for evil.
That is crazy. It just shows how much heavy lifting art and culture do in shaping our theology. But I mean, it's not just the visual representation that's fluid, right? The actual concept of what Satan is varies enormously, even today.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, there was this 2009 Barna survey that found up to 40% of American Christians view Satan not as a literal living entity, but merely as a symbol of human evil.
Yeah, disbelieving in a literal supernatural devil is surprisingly common, even within organized religion.
Yeah.
But for those who do view Satan as a literal entity, the standard consolidated idea is that of a fallen angel.
Right.
A uniquely powerful created being who rebelled against God, rules over a kingdom of demons, and basically acts as the supreme arch-nemesis of the Creator.
The ultimate cosmic bad guy. But here's where it gets really interesting for this deep dive. If we rewind the clock all the way back to the earliest texts of ancient Israelite religion, like the early sections of the Hebrew Bible, that supreme, singular, evil entity is completely absent.
It's true.
The cosmic opponent to God just doesn't exist.
He doesn't. In the oldest sections of the Hebrew Bible, the word Satan isn't a proper name at all. It is a common noun.
Like just a regular word.
Just a regular word. It translates simply to adversary or accuser or, one who obstructs. And initially it was used to describe regular, everyday human beings.
Give me an example of that.
Sure. So in the book of 1 Samuel, the Philistines referred to King David as a potential Satan.
Wait, David, as in King David?
Yeah. They literally just mean he is a human adversary who might turn against them in battle.
Okay, so early on, it's just a lowercase word for someone standing in your way. But then as we look at slightly later texts in the Hebrew Bible, like the book of Job or the book of Zechariah, the word evolves into a title, right? The Satan.
Exactly. It gets the definite article.
And the best analogy I can think of for how this character operates is like a celestial district attorney.
That is a highly accurate way to frame it, actually, because in the opening chapters of Job, God is presiding over a divine court. It's depicted much like an ancient Near Eastern royal council.
Right.
And the Satan is present among the heavenly beings. But he isn't a demon. He isn't a fallen angel who hates God.
He works for him.
Yes. He is a divine prosecutor whose literal job description is to travel the earth and test the loyalty of God's subjects. He challenges Job's righteousness, basically acting as a legal adversary in this divine courtroom.
Okay, wait, I have to push back on this a little bit because looking at it from an analytical perspective, it raises a massive theological dilemma.
Oh, it definitely does.
Because if God is supposed to be all-knowing in these early texts, why does he need to hire a prosecutor to test people? Doesn't he already know the outcome?
Right, and that's the exact tension that ancient writers were wrestling with. In this early stage of Israelite religion, the theology was strictly monolithic. Yahweh, the God of Israel, was responsible for absolutely everything.
So there was no division of labor between good and evil.
None. In fact, in the book of Isaiah, God explicitly says, I form the light and create darkness. I bring prosperity and create disaster. I, the Lord, do all these things.
Wow.
So Satan, in Job, is essentially an administrative functionary. He is doing the dirty work that God authorizes.
This is a massive point when we evaluate this from an atheistic or a purely historical perspective. Because in this early phase, human beings hadn't yet felt the need to invent a cosmic scapegoat, right?
Precisely.
The universe wasn't fractured into a war between ultimate good and ultimate evil. God owned both the blessings and the disasters.
Exactly. The universe was a monarchy, not a battlefield.
Huh.
But that raises an unavoidable question for historians.
Right. How do we get from A to B?
Exactly. If the Israelites started with a loyal celestial district attorney who worked for God, how in the world did that character turn into a supreme, malevolent dragon trying to destroy the universe?
Right. Like, did the ancient Israelites just wake up one Tuesday, decide they didn't like this divine prosecutor, and vote to turn him into a supervillain?
Not at all. Theology rarely undergoes massive structural changes without immense trauma.
Yeah, what happened?
To understand how the adversary became the devil, we have to look away from the scriptures for a moment and look at geopolitics. We have to look at the year 586 BCE and the Babylonian exile.
Okay, so if I put myself in the shoes of a Judean elite in 586 BCE, my capital city, Jerusalem, is sacked by the Babylonians.
Yep.
The grand temple, the literal dwelling place of my God, is burned to the ground, and I am dragged hundreds of miles away into exile in Babylon.
It's devastating.
Your entire theological worldview, the belief that your God protects your city and your people, has just been violently shattered. How do you even make sense of that trauma?
Well, it creates an intense cognitive dissonance. The problem of evil, what theologians call thematicity, suddenly becomes an existential crisis.
Yeah.
If God is entirely in control and God is completely good, why did our city burn?
Right. Why are our children suffering in exile?
Exactly. And this is where the historical mechanics get fascinating, because decades later, the geopolitical landscape shifts again. The Babylonians are conquered by the Achaemenid Persian Empire.
And the Persians have a totally different approach.
They do. They implement a radically different policy. They actually allow the exiled Judeans to return home.
But they don't return to an independent nation.
No, they don't.
For the next 2 centuries, Judea is a province under the control of the Persian Empire. And this is where the cultural collision happens, right? Because the Judean elites are living alongside Persian officials, trading with them, and inevitably, they are exposed to Persian theology.
Specifically, a religion called Zoroastrianism,
Yeah.
which originated in ancient Iran. And it offered a profoundly different cosmic structure to solve that exact problem of evil we were just talking about.
Yes.
Zoroastrianism teaches a strict cosmic dualism. The universe is locked in an eternal battle. On one side, you have Ahura Mazda, the supreme, perfectly good creator deity associated with truth and light.
Okay. And on the other side?
On the other side is Angramenyu, a holy, evil, destructive spirit associated with lies and darkness.
Oh, I see where this is going. Let's look at this impartially through the lens of human sociology. You have a traumatized Judean population trying to understand their suffering. Encountering this Persian dualism offers a powerful new framework.
It really does.
Because what if God isn't presiding over both the good and the bad? What if the universe is split? What if there's a cosmic war happening behind the scenes and earthly empires destroying Jerusalem are just symptoms of this unseen spiritual warfare?
It's a theological revelation. The universe goes from being a single, unified monarchy to a polarized battlefield. The light is separated from the dark.
That makes so much sense.
And while historians acknowledge that we can't pinpoint the exact day a Judean scribe adopted a Zoroastrian concept, the broader impact on Jewish texts following this period is undeniable. The seed of cosmic dualism was planted.
Which brings us to the era where this seed sprouts and just goes completely wild. Let's talk about the Second Temple period.
A very chaotic time.
Yeah. Just to orient you, the listener, this is the period stretching roughly from 516 BCE to 70 CE. The Judeans have rebuilt their temple, but they are constantly being kicked around and occupied by massive oppressive empires, First the Persians, then the Greeks under Alexander the Great, and finally the Romans.
And that historical context of constant oppression is vital, because when your earthly reality is defined by subjugation to foreign empires, apocalyptic literature flourishes. Writers began workshopping new ways to explain their suffering.
Right.
Once this idea of a cosmic war hits Jewish literature during the Second Temple period, it sparks an absolute explosion of lore. It's a maelstrom of new theology.
It really is. You start seeing texts theologizing about a literal spiritual being of goodness fighting a spiritual being of evil. For instance, in the Book of Tobit, we get a particularly wicked demon named Asmodeus.
Right.
And the etymology there is a smoking gun, isn't it? The name Asmodeus is linked directly to a Zoroastrian demon named Ashma, who was the Persian spirit of wrath.
Exactly. The cultural exchange is right there in the language. And then we look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, written by a sect of Jews living out in the desert. In texts like the Community Rule and the War Scroll, we see what scholars call two spirits theology.
Which sounds a lot like what we just talked about.
It maps perfectly onto that Persian dualism. The universe is rigidly divided into the spirits of light and the spirits of darkness.
Who leads them?
The archangel Michael leads the sons of light, and they are opposed by a malevolent angel named Belial, who commands an entire army of evil spirits.
But Belial isn't the only bad guy in town. We have to talk about the apocalyptic text, specifically the first book of Enoch, because Enoch takes a tiny, cryptic couple of verses in the book of Genesis about the sons of God marrying human women, and it just expands it into an epic blockbuster narrative.
It really does.
We see the concept of angels literally rebelling and falling from the heavens like stars. They're called the Watchers.
And what's crucial is how the book of Enoch explains the origins of human evil. These fallen angels don't just exist, they actively corrupt humanity.
Oh, like they teach them things.
Exactly. They teach humans forbidden knowledge. They teach men how to forge swords and armor, bringing warfare to the earth. They teach women how to use cosmetics and root-cutting magic. They are the catalyst for the corruption of the earthly realm.
It's basically an ancient origin story for the military-industrial complex.
Huh, pretty much.
But here's the thing that stands out to me. The chief bad guy leading these fallen angels in Enoch isn't called Satan. He isn't called Belial. He's called Shemihaza. Or, well, in a different section of the same book, he's called Exile.
All right, the names keep changing.
And then you look at another major text from this era, the Book of Jubilees. And the leader of the demonic forces is a character named Mastema. It sounds like a messy comic book universe.
It does.
Different authors are workshopping a dozen different supervillains to explain the world's evil. Why didn't they just stick with one?
Well, because there was no universally agreed upon orthodoxy yet. Ancient religion was incredibly diverse internally. There wasn't a central council locking these doctrines into place.
So they were just figuring it out as they went.
Basically, different sectarian groups living under immense pressure from the Greeks and Romans were independently wrestling with these Persian-influenced concepts of dualism. They were experimenting with how to personify ultimate evil, applying it to their own local traditions in real time.
Okay, so we have a massive historical gap to bridge. We have a celestial DA from the Book of Job. We have centuries of exile and Persian dualism. And now we have a chaotic drafting phase in the Second Temple period, with a dozen different evil angels.
Belial, Asael, Masema, Shemihaza.
That's a lot of names. How do we get from this crowded field of villains to the singular unified devil that eventually dominated Western history?
That consolidation happens with the emergence of the early Jesus movement.
Yeah.
The early Christians grew directly out of this vibrant, chaotic Second Temple cultural context.
Right.
We have fast-forwarded about 500 years since the Babylonian exile. By the time we get to the text of the New Testament, we see a profound synthesis of all these competing ideas.
Yeah.
The various names and concepts begin to merge, primarily under the Hebrew word Satan.
Or its direct Greek translation, right? Diabolos, which gives us the English word devil.
Exactly.
And diabolos basically means slanderer, or one who throws something across your path. And what's brilliant is how this new consolidated character absorbs the powers and backstories of all the previous drafts.
He really does.
Like, he keeps his old job description from the Book of Job. He's still a tester. We see this when he tempts Jesus in the desert, or when he tempts Judas to betray Jesus. But now he's been massively upgraded.
He has. The New Testament Satan has all the powers that were introduced in those Second Temple texts. He is now referred to as the ruler of the demons. He is given the power to cause physical illness and death.
So he's not just a DA anymore.
No, he is the architect of a dark spiritual army warring against God. These attributes simply do not exist in the earliest Hebrew Bible texts. They are the direct inheritance of Belial from the Dead Sea Scrolls and Asarel from 1st Enoch.
All the powers consolidated into one boss. And once early Christianity establishes this ultimate cosmic villain, they do something I find absolutely fascinating. They engage in historical retconning, retroactive continuity.
I love that term. It's a very modern concept, but it's exactly what ancient theologians did.
It's like when a movie sequel comes out and completely changes the meaning of the original film. The original writers didn't intend it, but the new writers recontextualized the past to fit the new narrative.
That is the perfect analogy.
Early Christians took this highly evolved Greek-era cosmic version of Satan, and they read him backward into the ancient texts of the Hebrew Bible written many centuries earlier.
And the prime example of this retroactive reading is the snake in the Garden of Eden.
Oh, right. Let's unpack that.
If you read the original text of Genesis in its ancient Israelite context, the narrative never identifies the serpent as anything other than a clever, talking animal.
Just a really smart snake.
Right. It's an origin story for why snakes crawl on their bellies and why humans don't like them. But viewed through the new, dualistic theological lens centuries later, early Christians retroactively identified that snake as Satan in disguise, initiating the cosmic war on Earth.
And the other example of this is just a masterclass in how political texts evolve into mythology. There is a passage in the book of Isaiah written during the Babylonian exile.
This one is fascinating.
The prophet is writing a taunt against an earthly human king, the king of Babylon, who is oppressing the Judeans. The prophet mocks this human king's immense arrogance, comparing him to the morning star trying to rise above the other stars, only to be thrown down.
And in Latin, morning star was later translated as Lucifer.
Right. The prophet says, "How you are fallen from heaven, O day star."
In its original context, it was pure political trash talk. The prophet was using ancient Near Eastern poetic imagery to say, you think you're a god, king of Babylon, but your empire will fall.
But then they retconned it.
Exactly. Through the lens of retroactive continuity, later readers disconnected that verse from its historical political context. They read it instead as the literal cosmic origin story of Satan rebelling against God and being cast out of heaven before time began.
So a political poem was transformed into a demonic biography.
Yes.
This is mind-blowing. Seeing how drastically these ancient texts were reinterpreted, how an ancient administrative prosecutor becomes an evil dragon, and how a political diss track becomes a cosmic origin story, it forces us to ask a critical question.
What's that?
When you are looking at all this dense history, how do you make sense of it without getting lost in the weeds? Like, how do you actually think like a historian?
Well, this is where historians use a specific framework to process complex cultural data objectively, the 5 C's. Rather than a rigid set of rules, it's a way of approaching the past. And the most foundational is simply recognizing change over time. It's the acknowledgement that human ideas are never static.
Right, because if you see the word Satan in the book of Job, written centuries before the Common Era, and you see the word Satan in the Gospel of Matthew, written in the 1st century under Roman occupation, you cannot assume they mean the same thing.
You can't. You have to let the past be the past.
And that leads directly into the 2nd C, right? Context.
Exactly. Ideas do not evolve in a vacuum. The concept of Satan evolved within a massive interconnected network of societal and political influences. You cannot understand the theology without understanding the trauma of the Babylonian exile, or the influence of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, or the later Hellenized empire of Alexander the Great.
The empires shape the theology.
Always.
Which means we have to embrace complexity and causality. The 3rd and 4th C's. History is not a simple math equation. We can't just draw a straight line and say Babylonian trauma plus Zoroastrianism equals the modern devil.
No, it's incredibly messy.
Right, we don't have historical transcripts of an exiled Judean priest sitting in a tavern debating cosmic dualism with a Persian functionary. We have to rely on probability and logic, acknowledging that countless human factors were at play.
Precisely. We must avoid overly simplistic narratives. But the final concept is arguably the most profound, and it serves as a massive corrective to how we usually view the past. It's the concept of contingency.
Contingency is the one that really messes with your head. It's the ultimate anti-teleology.
It is. Teleology is the assumption that history was always headed toward a predetermined destination. It's like reading the last page of a mystery novel and assuming the characters knew who the killer was all along.
And contingency shatters that.
Completely. Contingency argues that every historical outcome depends entirely on a fragile string of prior conditions. Everything is connected, and nothing was inevitable.
Think about what that actually means for your worldview today. If the Babylonians hadn't invaded Judah, if the Persian Empire hadn't subsequently conquered Babylon and implemented their highly specific policies of cultural integration, the entire modern concept of God, Satan, and cosmic evil in Western religion might look completely different today.
Absolutely.
The deepest theological beliefs of billions of people over the last 2 millennia hinged on ancient, seemingly random geopolitical military victories.
Because if you alter just one prior condition in that chain of events, perhaps the lowercase adversary remains just a divine prosecutor. Perhaps cosmic dualism never takes root in the Mediterranean. Contingency forces us to realize that the ideas we take for granted as eternal static truths are actually the result of highly specific, fragile historical collisions.
So, bringing this entire journey together, we've watched an ancient Hebrew noun for a human adversary slowly snowball. It was reshaped by the profound trauma of exile, infused with the dualism of a conquering Persian Empire, workshopped by dozens of apocalyptic authors during the oppressive Second Temple period, consolidated by the early Jesus movement, and retroactively written back into the origins of humanity.
It is a breathtaking historical arc.
Mm-hmm.
And returning to our mission at the start of this deep dive, understanding this arc is deeply empowering no matter your personal worldview.
Definitely.
Because if you approach this from an atheistic perspective, it is a profound sociological case study in how human societies construct mythologies to cope with trauma and the problem of evil.
Right.
And if you approach it from a devout perspective, it reveals the complex, thoroughly human historical medium through which theological understanding unfolds over time. Realizing that our most profound concepts of good and evil have a tangible historical evolution empowers us to think critically about every piece of information we inherit.
It strips away the illusion that our ideas just dropped out of the sky fully formed. Which leaves me with a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over today. We started by stripping away the medieval pitchforks and the pop culture myths that previous generations built to understand the ultimate embodiment of evil.
We did.
But if a concept as fundamental as Satan evolves so drastically based on ancient geopolitical accidents, shifting empires, and cultural collisions, how might humanity's concepts of supreme good and supreme evil look 500 or 1,000 years from now? As our modern world becomes more globally interconnected than ever before, what current cultural collisions are quietly rewriting our beliefs right now?